Hello, everybody. I know it's a little late in the month, but I've been under the weather. So I read 21 books in September, and it feels like I read all these books like forever ago. So if I look at my notes a lot, I apologize. But let's jump right in. First up is a book called Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett. This is a story about a woman who is the daughter of like a powerful hip hop artist, and her younger sister one day dies, and the older sister, believes that she was murdered instead of just dying of an overdose. This is like a mystery, it's a thriller. But it really just doesn't work. I was not a huge fan of this one. The characters felt completely underdeveloped. The sisters, basically, like, the story keeps telling you that these sisters, even though they were estranged, like, really loved each other, but it is not really relayed in the story at all. It just, the story's all over the place. The most interesting character is like the red herring of the story. So when your red herring is the most interesting part, it's like, that's not really a great sign. And then the ending is so quick and unsatisfying that it really feels like it's not worth the read. And for a thriller, you definitely want to have like a nice, satisfying wrap up. So this definitely did not deliver on that. I gave this one a 2.75. I really wanted to like it. Like, that's the thing about reading thrillers, is that like you are invested. So when it comes out being like a nothing ending, it's really disappointing. So I gave this one a 2.75. It was not for me. This next one, though, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Incredible magical experience. This is a story about a young man whose name is Piranesi, and he lives in this like magical house of like infinite corridors that hold all like the magic, and just like it just holds everything that exists in the world in like the form of statues. And he has been exploring these corridors for years and cataloging everything. And he lives in this house with one other person who's like an older gentleman who he only sees like twice a week. And oh my God, the way that the story unfolds is so incredible. I absolutely loved the journey of reading this book. And it's a pretty short book. And the amount of things that happen in this book for how short it is like nothing short of amazing. This book is truly a breathtaking experience. I wish I could reread this again for the first time and just forget everything. Like, I really, really love this. This was a 5 out of 5. If a book ever deserves to be a 5 out of 5, it is really, really, really good. I definitely recommend it. It's so cool. It's just really, really cool. Next, we have Greek Lessons by Han Kang. Han Kang, I've read 2 of her other stories, The Vegetarian and Human Acts, which are 2 stories I absolutely love. And Han Kang actually just won the Nobel Prize in Literature, which is so awesome. I'm so happy for her because I absolutely love her writing. And this book, Greek Lessons, is another really, really cool story. It is about a woman who feels like her life is unraveling as she slowly loses the ability to speak, and losing the ability to speak, her identity as a person is also slowly slipping away. And if you're familiar with Han Kang's work, she has a very clear through line of all of her stories about losing your humanity and becoming something that you are not. Her writing is very heavy, it's very melancholic. It reads like absolute poetry, but it's very, very solemn, and you get this very heavy sense of like sadness while you read it. So I understand that her books are not going to be for everyone because they can be very depressing. Her past book, The Vegetarian, I found that book to be like incredibly, surprisingly depressing. And then Human Acts is literally about like a horrific massacre that the South Korean government committed. So it's very depressing. And this is another one. but her writing is absolutely spectacular. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. This is another pretty short book. You could definitely finish this one in one sitting. Next is Flights by another author I love, Olga Tokarczuk. This is it's kind of hard to describe this one. It's like several short stories, but none of them are written in a linear fashion. You will have a few pages dedicated to one story, and then it will cut to another story, and then maybe 30-40 pages down the line, you will get a few more pages of that story. And there's a lot of pictures in this book as well that go along with each of the stories. The stories are basically all about being a traveler in the world, metaphorically, spiritually, physically, in all the senses. All the characters in the book are traveling in a sense. Oftentimes it's also like metaphysical, like stages of being. It is pretty long. This book I think is nearly 500 pages. 400 or 500 pages, and I think it could have done with being maybe around 300. I think some of the stories were a bit more engaging than others, so, you know, when the book is that long, you kind of want to trim the fat, so to speak. But I really, really love Olga Tokarczuk's writing style and the range of themes that were covered. I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5, but I love Olga Tokarczuk, so she can do no wrong in my eyes. Next we have Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a story about a future where all monsters have been eradicated after a revolution. And in this world, monsters are, it's people who are bad people who are racist, who are bigoted. And in this society, we see them completely done away with. I think the story is a little bit simplistic, but the message of the story I think is very important. It's basically teaching people that we can do away as much as we think we can with the evils of the world, but if we ignore present evils, they will just continue that cycle of abuse in the world, and also the importance of teaching history. You know, when we stop teaching history, it's destined to repeat itself. It's very evident. I mean, like, unless you were literally born yesterday. So, while I do think it's simplistic, I think this is a really good, like, YA novel, and I do really like Akwaeke Emezi's writing, so I gave this one a 3.8 out of 5. Next is another heavy hitter of an incredible book titled Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is about two friends who have been estranged for quite some time, reconnecting in college, and they decide to start making video games together, and it kind of covers them life from very early college into late adulthood. Oh my god, this book is so good. This is a long book, but it does not feel that way at all. The pacing is really, really good. It shows the messy and complicated lives of these characters. They are all fully drawn out, fully thought out, and I was so invested. I was 100% invested. There are things in this book that happened that like had me clutching my pearls. It was a really, really engaging story, and it just felt very cohesive. It's also written in a really interesting writing style. I find nowadays, sometimes when you're reading books, they're missing like a distinct style. It feels like some authors are just writing to write books, and then others are writing to develop like a unique style and make the stories like really fun to read. And this is a book where it's really fun to read. It's written where you have glimpses of the characters' childhoods, and then it'll cut to them in the future, but it's not giving anything away. It's keeping those little things to keep you engaged. So it's a really, really well written story. I gave this one a 5 out of 5. It's really, really awesome. And I love the characters. Like, it really, really has great characters. Oh my god, my cat is about to fucking knock over. Anyway. So that was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I gave that one a 5 out of 5. Really great book. Next is Second Place by Rachel Cusk. This is an author that has been very, very heavily recommended from where I get all my recommendations, which is TikTok. And this is the first one I read. It is a story about an older woman who lives in like a farmhouse with her husband and her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend. And she invites an artist to come and stay with her. in the farmhouse, and it brings a lot of her insecurities and fears up to the surface. And while I found the character to be sympathetic, I did not particularly relate to her. And I kind of couldn't understand a lot of the decisions she was making in the book. It kind of confused me. Because, like, this artist is a dickhead. Like, I'm like, why are you putting up with this shit? This is your farmhouse and he's a broke-ass artist. Like, why are you letting him stay? But, Rachel Cusk has a very, very beautiful writing style, and I can definitely see why people are drawn to her writing. I gave this one a 3.5 because I really just did not personally connect with any of the characters, but I could definitely see why some people would like this more than I did. Next, we have Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. And this is like one of the best books ever written. Honestly, I truly believe that this is one of the best books ever written. I believe it's up for the Booker Prize list, maybe for the short list. It's getting some award, or it's on like it's being nominated for some award, and it is an incredible book. This is a story about a young man who is a recovering addict, and he sees an article about an artist who is dying of cancer, and she is doing an art exhibit where people can basically just have conversations with her, and she is going to die in a few weeks, so the exhibit is open basically until she dies. And he gets so inspired by this that he travels to see her, and he decides to start writing poems about martyrdom. He's very, very inspired and attached to this idea of martyrdom. This story is so beautiful. I was hooked from the very beginning. There, like, once again, this book had scenes that literally had me going like, like, it's so good. It explores so many themes of existentialism, nihilism, grief, what we deserve as people, themes about like death and love and humanity. And oh my gosh, I don't want to give anything away because the story is such a powerful and rich story, and I hope that, I don't know if this author has written any more books, but I would love to read them, and I hope that he keeps writing because he is an extremely talented author, and this book is truly incredible, and I hope it wins a billion awards. It is, I think, honestly one of the best books I've ever read. It really, really, it's fantastic. It really is fantastic. This is an absolute slam dunk 5 out of 5. If you read any of the books from any of the ones that I recommended, I think this is a very, very powerful book, and I think it's also very relevant to the current time we live in with all the crazy things that are happening in the world. This really, I felt like, is very grounding. So it's a really, I can't sing its praises enough. Next, we have a book called Middlesex by Jeff Eugenides. Eugenides. I was really, really excited to read this book because it is about it has an intersex main character named Cal Stefandes, and this is about, he's recounting his whole family's history and kind of how he came into being, and also how his history is affecting his current life. Again, I was so excited to read this book because I don't think I've ever read a book where the main character is intersex. That is definitely a very underrepresented group in the LGBTQ community. But my god, this book is so long. It's like 600 pages and it is so fucking boring. It is so boring. This is one of the first books I considered in all the books I read not finishing because it was so boring. I was so excited to read a book about an intersex character, and then like the first 500 pages is about how his like grandparents are cousins. It was just so fucking boring. I really, really was so boring. I'm so sorry. I wanted to love it. This book was also on the top 100 of the New York Times books of the 21st century. And it was pretty, like, high up there, I think. Or I guess low on the list. And I was kind of shocked because this book is really, really boring. I'm sorry. I gave it a 2.75 out of 5. It was not for me. Next, we have Transcendent Kingdom by Yasi. This is a book that was on my reading list for a while, and it is about a neuroscientist that is battling her grief and also having this inner conflict when it comes to her religious beliefs after her brother dies of an overdose, and her mom has been plunged into this like lifelong depression, basically. I was so engrossed and really, really enjoyed the main character's perspective. I thought it was extremely respectful and really beautiful. And it made me consider a lot of things that I haven't considered when it comes to the intersection of like science and religion. I know that's kind of like a trope in a lot of books, especially in sci-fi. I actually thought this was going to be a sci-fi book by the description, but it's not. It's set in modern time. And the main character just has a really strong, compelling voice, and seeing the things that she has to battle, it's like, it was really, really, like, interesting. She is a flawed main character as well. She's flawed in a way that is very different from other flawed characters. I feel like a lot of the characters I read about that are flawed are very messy. They make a lot of poor decisions, and that is definitely, I love that, but she is very flawed in the way that she is extremely rigid, and she refuses to let go of that rigidity, and it's causing complications in her life. So this is a story, very, very compelling story, very, very compelling characters, and a lot of really interesting philosophy for you to explore. So I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5, like, really awesome book. I really, really love this one, and I definitely will be reading more of Ya Gyasi's books. She's a really, really great author. She's another one. She's a really cool writing style, so she's really awesome. Next, we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is a story about a woman whose wife goes on a underwater exploration in a submarine. Her and her crew are going to an extremely, I guess, like in the book, they're going to the farthest anybody has ever gone in the ocean, and it's supposed to be, I think, like a month-long journey, but her wife doesn't return for like 9 months. So she's gone for a very, very long time, and when she returns, she is not acting like herself. From that description, I thought this was going to be a lot like the movie Annihilation, which is a movie I love, has a similar premise where like a couple, the husband goes away into like a strange phenomena nature zone, and he comes back acting very strange. But that's kind of where the similarities end. It was okay. I kind of didn't understand a lot of the choices that the main character makes. Like, her wife comes home acting completely unlike herself, and she just, like, doesn't act with a lot of urgency. It's kind of strange. It's a very slow story also, and I do appreciate some of the things that the story does because it plays everything very close to the chest. So it's a chapter from the wife who is on land's perspective, and then it'll cut to the wife, sorry, I don't remember their names, who was in the submarine, and you're slowly seeing what happened on the journey, but you never get shown everything, which I do think is very compelling. I do really like that. But this story, it was really missing something, and the characters, I felt like, were not developed enough for me to be fully invested in them. I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5, but it was pretty creepy and spooky, so it does have that going for it. Next, we have Never Whistle at Night. I don't have the author because it is 26 short stories written by 26 different authors, and I do not have all their names. I'm sorry about that. But these are all indigenous dark fiction themed short stories. Yeah. And I loved some more than I loved others, which is kind of, I mean, that's kind of what happens when you read a book that is a series of short stories. But, like, my biggest complaint is that the short stories were way too short. Like, 26 authors. I kind of wish that this book had been split into 2, so that maybe 13 authors in each one, and then like so each author could have their story be a little longer, because I felt like a lot of them ended right before something juicy happened. And I get, like, I've read plenty of short stories. I know how a short story works, but it really felt like some of them ended very, very prematurely. Overall, I gave it a 3.75 because I really did enjoy a lot of the stories that I read, but I just really wish that it could have been more developed. So that's like my only complaint. But yeah. Next, we have a book that was super, like, really surprised me. It's called Big Swiss by Jen Began. This is about a woman who works as a transcriber for a sex therapist, and she becomes infatuated with a client and kind of ends up accidentally befriending her when they meet randomly in public. And this is one of those stories where I thought it was going to be like a dark comedy. And even though it is secretly a fantastic book about struggling with PTSD and grief. And it hits you. You slowly realize that that's what the book's about. And you're like, oh my God, how incredible. The characters, again, like very, very funny, very, very compelling. The different ways that grief and PTSD are shown in this book, the effects of trauma from different people, I thought was really, really cool. I feel like trauma is something that is not always very well represented in books. I feel like it's either very sensationalized or you only see it from like one way, you know, the kind of stereotypical, like very... I'm not saying this to put anybody down who experiences this, by the way, but the very, like, stereotypical, like, flashbacks and very tearfulness, I feel like that's kind of the only story we get of trauma. And then they're just, like, suddenly better. That is not the case in this. It feels very realistic, very raw, but it is very, very darkly funny, irreverent. I love the dynamic between the characters and the conversations being had in this book. It really, really was pleasantly surprising. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5. If you notice, a lot of the common theme between all the books I love is that they pull you in and then they pull back the curtain and there's even more to love. You know, it represents itself as one thing and then it gives you even more, which is awesome. I love books that are just secretly, like, you know, little hints of philosophy. So I love that. All right. 8 more books to go. Oh my God. Next, we have The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy is also the author of the book of No Country for Old Men, which is a movie that, like, everybody and their grandma has seen. And The Road is set in a post-apocalyptic America where a son and a father are just walking, and they are walking, and they are walking. This is unbelievably bleak and depressing. Yeah, nothing really happens in this book. Like I said, it's a whole lot of walking. And it's very depressing. And I was hooked the whole time. And I gave it a 4 out of 5. I really don't know what more to say. It's written in a very distinct style. It's very depressing. And it's also like the apocalypse, it's not the focal point of the story. They don't really talk about what happened as far as what the exact apocalypse is, but things are clearly very dire, and the direness of the situation is very much conveyed in the book. You get that feeling of dread constantly as you're reading this. So if you're into that, I gave it a 4 out of 5. Next, we got Otessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This is about an unnamed narrator who is abusing, like, sleeping drugs and anxiety drugs so that she can basically sleep for, like, a year straight. My God, she is, like, the most unlikable character ever. But I was hooked. I was very much engaged. Nothing really much happened. Not a lot of plot heavy things happen in this book because, I mean, the premise is literally about a woman who is sleeping most of the time. But this is another story that has a lot kind of underneath the surface when it comes to why this character is making the decisions that she is making. She's still very unlikable, but I love an unlikable main character. It's a bizarre journey, and it was very gripping. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 as well. If you know anything about Ottessa Moshfegh, she is very, very good at writing characters that are not very likable, but are still very, very compelling. Next, we have a Korean book called Saha by Chonam Jo. And this is a story about an apartment complex called Saha, where people who basically are like third-class citizens live. They live in this city called Town. And you don't really learn a lot about Town, but it was basically, the premise is that this government took over this city, and then the people who were living there basically had to earn their citizenship. They didn't automatically become citizens. So you can be like a first-class citizen, you can be a second-class citizen, which means you basically like have a temporary visa, and you keep having to prove that you are worthy enough to be a citizen. And then a third-class citizen are people who basically have nothing, but they still live there basically in complete squalor. And this follows the residents who are living in this apartment complex. And while I enjoyed the character, it's very character-oriented storytelling. The writing is so dry. It's like very boring and uninteresting. It's very boring and uninteresting, and it doesn't feel concise enough. It reminded me a little bit of The Memory Police, where you kind of have this very enigmatic city. You don't learn a lot about it, but this story, they gave away too much. They set up too many questions, and it only made me frustrated because my questions are not being answered. And it felt like they should have been answered. It's not one of those things where it's like the mystery adds to like the feelings of creepiness or like dread. It kind of just made me annoyed that they introduced all these things that kind of went nowhere. I gave this one a 3.25 out of 5. It's not terrible by any means, but again, it's extremely dry. And I feel like not enough, there's not enough substance in this book, honestly. Next, we have Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. This is a semi-biographical book about a young boy who is grappling with self-discovery and religious abuse. His father is a pastor at the Pentecostal church, and he kind of seems to not be happy with the path that his life is on. The religious symbolism in this book is extremely dense and beautiful, while also being very like creepy and honestly like uncomfortable at times. Like, religious trauma is like fucking freaky, man. But it's a very powerful story. This is another one that can be a little dry at times because it's just a lot of religious jargon. So if you're not used to reading that, or maybe you didn't grow up with that, it can be a little like tedious to read through. But James Baldwin, incredible writer. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5, and the ending is also very powerful. So I definitely think that it is worth the read, and I feel like a lot of people will feel very seen while reading it. All right, almost done. We just got a few more books left. Oh my god. Smother Moss by Alyssa Allering. The cover for this book is absolutely gorgeous. It's like, I saw this and I was like, I really want to read this. But this is a story set in southern Appalachia with two sisters who become intertwined with a local murder when two local tourists who are hiking through the Appalachian mountains get murdered, and these two sisters inexplicably get themselves involved. I loved the creepiness. I loved the dreamlike atmosphere that this book creates. But this is another one where it introduced too many things and then didn't really go anywhere with them, or didn't take them far enough. I feel like, how like in Stephen King books, there's a lot of magic in his books, and he just kind of he kind of just presents them that, like, yep, there's magic and this is how it is, and you just kind of have to accept it. But his stories are so long, and so there's all this, like, world building, and so you just accept it as fact. I feel like this book tried to do it, but this book is, like 250 pages, so it did not have that build-up that it needed to. I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5 because I actually quite liked it, but I really just wanted something a little bit more. But honestly, the cover alone, I feel like is beautiful enough to get... It was beautiful enough to get me to read the book, so I do think it is worth it. All right, next we have Anyone's Ghost by August Thompson. This is a story about a young boy named Davy who befriends and falls in love with a slightly older boy named Jake, and he basically stays in love with him forever. And I just don't think that this book is for me. Quite frankly, I have read a lot better queer coming-of-age stories. I just have. If maybe I had just started reading again and this was the first one I picked up, I probably would rate it higher, but I have just read, like, Hombrecito, Freshwater, I Will Greet the Sun Again. I have read plenty of books with queer characters, like, and this one just didn't do it for me. It felt like a coming-of-age story where the character never really comes of age. He is, like, forever stuck in his teenage years, and it was just kind of annoying to read, and I just didn't buy into the connection that the two characters had. It felt a little shallow and kind of boring. So while I don't want to shit on this book too much, because it's fine, like, there's nothing wrong with it, but I have just read better, so I gave it a 3. It just wasn't for me. Like, I have read much better, but I definitely think some people will like this book. Also, I accidentally spilled, like, lemonade all over it, and I felt really, really bad. I was very guilty when I handed it back to the librarian, but they said it was fine, so. All right, House of Bones and Rain by Gambino Iglesias. This is a story about 5 friends who enact a revenge plan on a drug kingpin after one of the friends' mothers is shot in a drive-by shooting. Oh my god, the foreshadowing in this book is great. The use of supernatural elements is great. This book had what Smother Moss is missing. It's missing that, like, world building. The characters were extremely flawed. This book is a series of fucking bad decisions after bad decisions, but they're also extremely sympathetic. Obviously, like, if your friend's mom gets murdered, like, that's really fucked up. It's also insanely violent. This book is extremely violent, and it focuses very, very heavily on the cycle of violence as something that these 5 boys have grown up with. It has surrounded them, and it has followed them in life, and it's part of the reason why they are so, like, stuck in the thick of it. This book does not hold back. Very, very raw, but I really, really enjoyed it. I think this is, like, a great supernatural horror book. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5. Another one of Gambino Iglesias' book, I think it's called, like, The Devil Takes You Home, is on my wish list, and I can't wait to read it. If it's anything like this, I know it's going to be fantastic. Again, if you're a fan of, like, supernatural horror and you don't mind extreme violence, this is definitely a good book. And last but not least is Housemates by Emma C. Eisenberg. This is a story about 2 roommates who embark on a road trip that brings them closer together and helps them explore the kind of life path that they have chosen. They're 2 artists. One is a journalist and one is a photographer. And they kind of join together and create a happy medium, which is a pun because medium is another form for art. This is very, very slow. Very, very slow-paced book. Very slow. It has a very cozy and warm feeling to it, and I felt that the characters were extremely realistic, like, almost too realistic, in the sense that it got a little boring at times. And nothing really happens plot-wise in this book. It is very, very much a slow, quiet character study of these two roommates. It's also told in a very unique way. There's like a third unnamed narrator who's kind of overseeing everything. And we never learn if this is like another person in their lives or just like the vehicle in which the story is told. And it does add, that little interesting kick to the story. This is also like, I really like it. The main characters are like all lesbians, which is pretty cool, but it's not my favorite. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5. It's also not that long. I think it's around 300, 400 pages. I do wish that it was a little bit more fast paced and kind of that there was more substance to it, but I did like it overall. And that is everything for September. Oh my God. I can't believe I read 21 books. I probably would have read more, but like for the last week of September, I was not feeling well. I just did not have any motivation to read. But also this video would be way too long if I read any more books. It's probably already like 45 minutes. But that was everything. Also, I made a TikTok video and I will hopefully be making more of those. So thank you guys for being patient with me while I make a video like 2 weeks late. So, happy October. It's spooky season, and I will smell y'all later.